For my final project, step 1, I'm going to be working with tearing paper and collaging it to create my landscape. So what I'll need is my rough draft of my landscape. I'm going to need my 3 backgrounds that I've already painted. These are the ones with the 1-inch white border. I'm going to need my 12 sheets of textured paper. 4 of those are cool colors, 4 of those of colors of my choice, and 4 of those are warm color. I'm going to need a bottle of glue, and I'm going to need an extra piece of scrap paper. Now that I have my materials gathered, I want to take a look at my rough draft. My first step is to decide where my 3 backgrounds will occur. So remember, we have a warm color background, a cool color background, and a colored background of our choice of colors. When those 3 backgrounds are put together, they will be the size of our rough draft. So looking at my backgrounds and my warm, I have my cool, and I have my background of choice of colors. I'm going to decide where exactly these will occur. So if I wanted my warm colors in the middle, then I can lay the other 2 beside it to see how I like that. Let's try maybe switching these 2. I like how my colors are kind of lining up here, and I do have some green on my cool color here, so maybe I will try with my color mix, my color choice I should say, in the middle, and my cool colors on the right. So those kind of go as if it's one image. I have my warm colors moving into cool colors, kind of like a rainbow. So I think I'll arrange my colored backgrounds this way. So that means the right side of my composition is going to be my cool color background. The middle of my composition is going to be my color choice. And the left side of my composition is going to be my warm colors. Now that I have that decided, one more thing I could do before I get started is decide if I want these areas to be the tops of my background. So you got to remember, some of our sky, which is what these backgrounds represent, the sky area, this is going to show. So what will it look like, since I do like how those mix together, and if I flipped it around? So I do like what I am seeing here, but I really do like this purple blue area up here. So I think I definitely want that at the top. So I'm going to switch it back around. And now that I have decided where my 3 backgrounds will join together, I'm now going to separate my 12 color sheets into sets. So we already have them separated into sets of color choice, where I could use whatever colors I wanted to. And those color choice ones are going to go with the color choice background. I have my set of cool colors, and my cool colors are actually going to go with my warm colors. And I have my set of warm color backgrounds, and those are going to go with my cool color background. So now that I have my composition beginning, I have my sky background selections as to what is the right side, middle, and left side of my composition. And I've now divided up my cool color textured papers with my warm background, my color choice textured papers with my color choice background, and my cool color background with my warm color textured papers. I'm going to now put these off to the side because I'm ready to start working. So I'm now going to take my rough draft and put it off to the side, but somewhere where I can see it. So I'm just going to move it up here to the top of my work area so I can clearly see my rough draft composition. Looking at my rough draft once again, you will notice that it is a lot larger than our colored areas of our background. It is the size of our 3 backgrounds put together, but that also includes the 1-inch border. So when I go to start working with tearing paper to create land features and collage, I'm going to be dividing this up visually into 3 sections. So if I choose to have my cool color background over here to the right, that means my land features for my background and middle ground that I created, I'll take those features on the right side so that they go with my background that I may put on the right side. How this will eventually lay out is these 3 backgrounds are going to create one entire composition. So the right side of my rough draft will be on whatever background I choose to be on the right. The middle of my rough draft will be on the background that I choose to be the middle. And the left side of my rough draft will be on the background that I choose to put on the left side. I'm going to begin with one of my colored backgrounds. So I'm going to start with the right side of my composition, and that's going to involve my cool color background. So I'm going to need my collection of warm colored texture papers. Now we have these little papers cut at 5 inches, so they will fit within our border. And we have at least 3 values of our textured papers: light, medium, and dark. And how we will work is I want to create atmospheric perspective. And atmospheric perspective will help us show depth. So anything that is far away in my composition is going to be the lightest value. And as I move forward, my values will become darker. Now we are not going to be working with our foreground at the moment, so we are just working with these land shapes that we put in our middle and background. So since my right side of my composition encompasses this area, I'm going to need a light color background landmass that is roughly this shape, and it's going to get overlapped with a medium value land shape and a darker value land shape. So I'm going to have 3 layers of paper glued on top of my cool color background. So we're going to use the process of just tearing the paper. Now I want my land masses to come fairly far up my background. I don't want to keep everything way down at the bottom. I want to help show depth. So I want to bring some of my furthest land masses about 2/3 of the way up my background paper. And then I can overlap it with some other land masses, and that still leaves room at the bottom for our foreground. So I'm starting with my lightest value paper, and it's going to be this landmass shape. And I'm also looking to see which part of that paper I'm going to use. Do I want my yellows up against my blues and greens and purples? Or do I want my pinks up against my blue, green, and purple? So I think I'm going to go with my yellows. Now that I've decided what color I'm going to have at the top from this piece of paper, I'm going to carefully try to mimic my landmass shape in my rough draft, but I'm going to tear the paper. Now you could, if you wanted to, on the back, use a pencil, but you got to remember that you have to flip around your landmass area. So I can't just draw this exactly the way it looks on the back of the paper, because it's going to be flipped when I come back around. But you could lightly sketch out that land shape on the back. And if it's not exactly as you originally drew it, that's okay. We're going to be tearing this anyway, so it might not be perfect to the rough draft, but it's going to be close. So I've kind of drawn what I want my landmass to look like, and I'm going to start tearing. So I'm going to try to control the tear as much as possible to get as close to my landmass shape as I can. I want this to come down. So now that I have this, I'm going to test it out by laying it up against my cool color background. And I'm going to decide if I want any changes. So I want this a little bit flatter at the top. So I'm going to tear off a little tiny bit off of this shape. And a little bit off of this one. And once I feel that I am happy with that landmass shape, I'm ready to glue it down. So I'm going to glue it within my 1-inch border. And this is why you would want an extra scrap of paper. We want the glue to go to the edges. And the liquid glue is going to work a little bit better than the glue sticks, but if you only have a glue stick, you can use that. You just might have to apply some glue on the edges. And I'm not going to hold my glue way above my piece of paper. I'm letting the tip of my glue bottle touch my paper. And I'm putting some on. And then I'm going to use one finger and I'm going to smear the glue on the back. And I want to make sure I get to the edges. And I also want to make sure I work quickly because I don't want my glue to dry too fast. So once I have that smeared to the edges, I'm then going to carefully move my scrap piece off to the side because I don't want to glue my background other than where I intend to put my landmass. And I'm going to carefully line up my landmass at the bottom inside my border. And I'm going to carefully press it and adjust it as I glue it down. Once I am fairly certain I'm in the right place with it, then I'm going to rub over top of it to glue it to that background. So by spreading the glue out, I'm going to have less glue squirting out from underneath and making a mess. It's thinned the glue, so it's going to bond a little faster. And then if you do happen to have an area in which maybe the glue dried too quickly, you could just take a little dot of glue on the edge of your scrap paper, dip your finger into it, and carefully lift it up and reapply some glue there. So now that I have that glued down, I'm going to let it dry for a couple minutes, not too long. Just give it a little bit of a chance to set up before moving on to the next part of the right side of my composition. So my first layer of my background has dried. Not completely, but enough that I can continue on. So now I'm going to work with this land feature, this land mass that's coming forward. So it's the next piece in front. And for this one, I'm going to choose a medium color paper. And for me, I have a couple of choices here. I have this medium color. It's pretty close to what that is on that end. Let's see if we turn it around. Those would definitely contrast against each other. And I have this medium color paper. So again, this end will contrast and this end will contrast. Now I also have to remember I'm going to be moving a little bit further up here. So I'm just going to roll this slightly to make sure that where I would end up tearing across and where I'd end up gluing down still has enough of a contrast. So that one does. This one still has a contrast, but not quite as much. So I think I'll go with this paper here. So now that I have that, I'm going to check both ends. I think I'll go with this side up. I'm now going to again tear out my land feature. So I can once again flip it over to the back. And I know this one now has a dip that's going to be further in the background before we come up to other features. And then I do want to check that to make sure that that's not going to be too high. So I think it is because I need this to stick up pretty far. So I'm going to move my sketched out line down further. So looking at it, this side is going to end up over here. And I think I'm going to move that line up just a little bit more to about here. So now that I have an idea of what I want, I'm going to again tear my paper and try to create my land feature. So it may work a little bit better if you lay the paper down. That way you can use one hand to kind of hold one half of the side you're tearing to the surface while the other one lifts the paper apart from each other. I'm going to check that. So I think that looks pretty good. So I don't think I'm going to need any adjustments. I like the overlap. Is it exactly like my previous one? No, I did come down a little bit further. I could, if I wanted to, test out my other half, but it's even shorter. I could possibly glue it a little higher because my next layer could cover that over, plus I still have my foreground. So if I did want this up just a tiny bit more, I could glue it a little bit higher off the bottom of my page. Well, from my border, I mean. So if that's the case, and if that's something I do want, then I just have to make sure when I do my next tearing that I am able to cover this all up, or that eventually my silhouette will cover this up, my foreground. So if I am going to glue that, then once again, I need my scrap piece of paper. And as before, I'm going to put a bead of glue around, letting the tip of my glue bottle touch the paper, and I'm going to once again use one of my fingers to spread that glue out to the edges. And then carefully pick it up, move my glued paper. And since I'm not worried about it touching the very bottom there, and I wanted this to overlap a little bit higher, I'm going to line it up to my side borders. Carefully lay it down, and once again, carefully smooth it down. Now you may want a wet paper towel to help clean off your fingers. And remember, we are working with watercolor there, so where the glue wet my background, it did pull out a little bit of cool color from my background. So I'm just taking a little piece of paper towel, try to clean that up some. And I'm just going to gently press. Make sure my edges are down. And that is layer number 2 of my background, middle ground areas. So I'm going to once again let this dry for a couple minutes. And then I have a third middle ground layer that I'm going to put in front of these two, but I'm going to let this set up for a couple minutes before I do that. So I'll be back once this is set up. Okay, so my second layer has dried, which means I'm now ready for my most forward layer, which is my heel in my rough draft. And for this one, I want my dark value, or a darker value than my middle value. So that is my piece of paper that looks like this. So before I talked about how we can line it up at the bottom, kind of curl this down to give us an idea of this, what part of this contrasts against our pieces. And for the most part, it contrasts against both, but I really like this dark area up in here. So I'm going to just tear my hillside from this top part, using as much of it as I can get, which means down at the bottom here, I'm going to have to trim this up so that my white border still exists. So that won't be too much of a hardship, and I'll show you how to trim that up in case you yourself end up with something that you would like to use most of a piece of paper in one section, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to glue into our perfect little 5-inch area at the bottom. So this is a pretty straightforward curve. It's going to start, as again, I want to use as much of this as possible at the top, so I'm going to start near the top corner here, and I'm just going to swoop down to the side. So again, if I sketch that out on the back, I'm going to take away just that much for now on my paper. And once again, I'm going to hold it down onto my table surface. I can move my background out of the way. And I'm just going to carefully tear along this line. And try to keep as much of the top of that piece of paper as I can, since I do like the colors up there. So now that I have that, and I want this to overlap all three of my land masses, I'm going to trim up the bottom. So what I'm going to do for this is very simple. I'm going to use my already existing light background here, and once again line it up where I want it, and I'm just going to make a little mark along my light border line that I can see here. So I'm using it kind of like a ruler, and a little mark over here, and then I'm just going to take my my ruler, line those two marks up, draw a line, and use my scissors to cut that off. And when I cut this, I want to make sure I don't leave any of the pencil showing, so I want to get rid of all the pencil also. And that is now ready to glue for my third layer of background. So now that I have that, I'm going to get my scrap piece of paper, and my glue's still slightly damp on there because it's a little bit more puddled up than what was on my project. So I'm going to fold it in half. Or I could get a new sheet of scrap paper if I needed it. Open up my glue, and just like before, put a bead of glue near the outer edge. Again, tip of the glue bottle touching, fill some glue into the center, and once I have that, take one finger, quickly smear this glue out, make sure I get all of my edges. and move my scrap paper away. Bring my sheet of paper back and carefully press down. My land mass, my land feature. So that is now the cool side, my left side of my composition. And I am going to now set this off to the side, and I'm going to move on to my next background and complete the land masses there. My cool color background, which ended up being the right side of my composition, is now drying. So I'm now moving over to the middle part, and this is my free choice of colors. That is the background I chose to be in the middle of my composition. So once again, I have at least 2 land masses and a third one even in the back here. So I am going to move over a little bit. So whereas my last one ended about here, remember we do have a little 1-inch white border. So I'm looking more for this area here in the middle of my composition to use these land masses. And it will help to have your first one near, so that when it comes to features that will be joining up, that we can at least get close to having them look like they are a continuous line from one background to the other. So just like before, I'm going to start with the landmass furthest to the background. And in this case, it's a small part of this mountain in behind my tree. It is overlapped by this mountainous range here. So I'm again going to look for my lightest value paper, which is this one. And it is fairly high up in my picture plane. So that means these colors up in here are what I need to look at for contrasting against. So I do think that my green here up against the orange and the orange up against the green here do contrast, but I do have another side here. So let me flip it around. And I think those colors show up lighter than the other ones did. So I'm going to go with this top side. So once again, I can either carefully sketch out my land mass, my land feature that I'm looking at. And remember, you got to sketch this out backwards because we are going to have to flip this over. And since my paper was originally shorter, only 8.5 inches by the 5 inches wide that we used before, it's naturally already going to be shorter than my painted background. Now if you have larger paper and if you are lining up the bottom of your little papers to your border line, then please do keep that in mind, that if your paper is taller, where exactly you may sketch or tear so that you can glue this within your border. So I'm going to once again work on tearing along this line. So this is going to represent my furthest away mountain in the middle of my composition. And once I have it torn out, if there's no adjustments I want to make to it, and that's I'm comparing it to my rough draft, I think again I want this to be a little flatter at the top. And I want a little step down here. Okay, I'm much happier to how that looks compared to my rough draft. So I'm going to go ahead and once again glue this down. So my glue has set up on this first layer of my second background. So now I'm ready to work on the land feature, the land mass in front of this one. So looking at my composition, it's going to be part of this one that continues. And in my composition, this area comes to a little bit of a peak, drops down, comes back up, flattens out a little bit. It's not as tall as this peak, flattens out a little bit, and then works its way across here and down off to the side. So I have two papers here that would be medium value. And I'm thinking since this background shows a lot of warm colors, I'm going to go with this one that shows a lot of cool colors, because remember, this is my choice background. So I could use, for me, I chose to use both cool and warm colors in that background. And so all my pieces of paper have some cool and warm colors to those. But since most of this cool tone will get covered up down here in this corner, I think I want to make sure I bring some of those cool tones back. So looking here, I'm going to probably start about here with my landmass coming up. So I'm lifting up the corner here and just making a little mark on the back there so I have an idea of where I want when I sketch this out. And I want it to end somewhere within here before dipping down in. So now that I have a couple marks here, I'm going to once again sketch this out. So I want this to come up, flatten out, and then start a descent. let me just double check here about where I had that. So I could bring that a little higher up. Make sure my mark there is dark enough. There we go. So I'm going to, once again, sketch this out. And begin my descent once again. Okay, I think that will work. In fact, I want to bring that over just a tiny bit more. Okay, so now that I have a plan, and again, as I said, you don't have to make a plan. You could just randomly tear, looking at your rough draft as you do so. But I like to have as much of a plan with this so I can get it as close to my drawing as possible. So here is my rough draft. And let's see how close we got. Not too bad. So there are some differences. Some of my land areas did get nudged over a little bit one way or the other. I could have made this area a little bit thinner now that I look with my rough draft down below it. But for the most part, not too bad. I think I got most of it placed about right. I have a lot of the movement I wanted. I have some atmospheric perspective coming through with my very light land masses in the back, my more medium valued land masses in front of those, and my darker value land masses in front of those. So this is the end of working with my background and middle ground. And in the next step, we're going to talk about our foreground. So for me, it is my land and my tree that I have drawn in my composition. Don't forget to take a photo of your 3 backgrounds with their background, middle ground layers showing atmospheric perspective and submit it to the assignment. You can either take a collection photo like this, and all I did was use a couple little donuts of tape and overlapped my 1-inch borders, or you can take individual photos of your left, middle, and right part of your composition and submit 3 different photos. Just make sure that the photos you submit of this step are very clear and that you are not cropping off areas. We want to see from border to border your background, middle ground areas.